The next anti-communist assault on the YWCA is significant, I think, from two angles. First, it's a reminder of the spectrum of women's movements, that the 20th century women's movements don't simply come out of the left or liberal contexts. And second, this very local episode of red baiting portended a massive transformation in the centers of power in American political life, a transformation that's certainly bearing fruit right now. It shows us something of the grassroots method of discrediting the spiritual underpinnings of liberal Protestantism. So not only do we get those charges coming from the fringe, which get official sanction through entities like the House Un-American Activities Committee, but we have these very effective ground level campaigns that compel the YWCA to retreat from its advocacy. So in November of 1951, YWCA fundraising executive Dorothy Nauset traveled to Alton, Illinois to smooth controversy created by a board member in the local association, a volunteer who sat on the finance committee. I do not believe I have ever spent a harder 2 days than those in Alton, she wrote in a confidential dispatch to the president of the National YWCA. The trouble? Mrs. J.F. Schlafly Jr., finance chairman, young, in her late 20s, attacked the YWCA because we were pink. We had communists on our staff, and Alton didn't want to send money when it was spent that way. So the source of the hard time was then a full-time housewife, a woman who 6 years previously had earned an MA in government from Radcliffe, and she was the future sweetheart of the silent majority, Phyllis Schlafly. Nauset took some pot shots at Schlafly in the memo, called her pleasant but cold and brittle, insinuated she was a social climber. She noted more than once that Schlafly was Catholic, and it doesn't say exactly why she keeps noting that, but it evokes the long-standing distrust of Catholics, perhaps questioning whether Schlafly was an agent provocateur with shadowy loyalties. And board members seem to have shared some of that concern. Nauset talked to them privately, and the president of the association Nauset asked the president of the association whether Schlafly should really be on the finance committee, and the president said that it was better to have her on the inside where her movements could be known. So Phyllis Schlafly demanded the YWCA institute a loyalty oath for its employees, placing in their contracts a pledge that read that they supported private property and an economy free from government control and ownership. Nauset reported that Schlafly was a convincing speaker and that local board members had no problem approving that oath. Nauset talked to a couple of the employees, one who said that she would not sign that oath, so Nauset put forward a compromise oath that was, it satisfied that employee, but it was still very patriotic and adamantly capitalist, and the compromise oath a firm belief in the American philosophy of individual opportunity, private property, and free enterprise. Schlafly was temporarily placated. She had an unsuccessful congressional campaign in 1952, and then she goes on the attack again in 1953, distributing around in Alton a paper that asks, "What's happened to the C in YWCA?" And I think it's important to note that Schlafly didn't cut her teeth on anti-feminism. And I don't think that her real passion is for women's issues as such. It's really about anti-statism and the rejection of social legislation, which is what she goes after in this paper. She distributed this to the community chest, the local community chests, which funded organizations like the YWCA. She singled out the considerable public affairs content in the YWCA magazine, stating that she could not understand why the YWCA was always advocating more than other agencies. And I can see why she asked that question. There was tension between the types of programming that local associations conducted, the types of things people were interested in at the ground level, and the commitments of the national staff. Who put out a lot of publications, who engaged in direct lobbying, and clearly advocated for liberal causes. Schlafly's attacks on the YWCA magazine were not unusual in that time for their stride in anti-communism. She was especially appalled that the student groups had called for recognition of Red China. The central issue, though, the thing that had taken the C out of the YWCA was, she wrote, "For every problem, social and economic, national YWCA professionals have but one solution: more government control and more government spending." It was persistent indoctrination for socialism. So she's arguing that that promotion of Christian citizenship, this designed to make love a guiding force in political and economic life, contradicted the true teaching of Jesus. In Schlafly's schema, Jesus values the individual over the collective. And Schlafly wrote that the organization's political endorsements purport to show that Jesus favored government-guaranteed cradle-to-the-grave security. The Good Samaritan can pass by his wounded neighbor with impunity. A government bureaucrat will do the job for him. So state-sponsored social services, in her esteem, weakened rather than reflected the spirit of fellowship. And so unsurprisingly, Schlafly drifted away from the YWCA after she served her term as finance chair, and she moved on to the Daughters of the American Revolution, a volunteer commitment that was more amenable to her political passions. So actions like these, repeated in several contexts, there were one in Queens that made the national news. There was a couple of these that made national news. They put the YWCA on the defensive. Rose Turlin transitioned into YWCA work that took her out of the public eye. And overall, the organization muted the political content of its programming. It didn't repudiate it, it didn't abandon it, but no longer do you see these types of articles in the magazine calling for consideration of whether the United States should recognize Red China. It was an organization that was already struggling financially, and it was pragmatic for it to shy away from controversy and avoid ruffling the feathers of its funders.